Now that we have our blaster shot prefab, let's create a script to control it and give it a rigid body and collider so it can move around and hit things. We'll start by going into the blaster shot prefab edit mode, and I'm going to hit add component, and I'm going to find a rigid body 2D. I'm going to expand it out and set the gravity scale to 0 because I don't want this thing to drop or drift down over time. And I'm going to set freeze rotation so that my blaster shot doesn't start spinning around or doing anything strange like that. Next, I'll add a collider, and I'm thinking that a circle collider 2D makes the most sense. The default radius is obviously way too big, but if I grab the radius and just click and drag, I can find a value that looks okay. I'm thinking probably about 0.12 or maybe even a 0.1, something right around there. And then that looks close enough. I could move that collider a little bit to the left, but I think that that's probably good enough. You hit it right on that edge, that'll count as a collision. The next thing I want is a script. So I'm going to go to the scripts folder and we're going to create a blaster shot script. So I'll right click, create C# script and call this blaster shot. We'll add that to our blaster shot object as soon as it finishes recompiling, and then we'll open our script up. So we've got the blaster shot there. Actually, let's exit out of prefab edit mode, let that save our prefab, and then open up our blaster shot script. So the first thing I'm gonna do with our blaster shot is just make it fly off to the right and then maybe disable itself or destroy itself as soon as it hits something. So the first thing we'll do is get the rigid body. We'll do that in an awake method. So I'll replace start with awake. Again, hit Control X on that line 7 and clear that extra comment out. I'm gonna say underscore RB equals get component, and we want to get a rigid body, but not a rigid body regular kind. We want the 2D kind. Then we'll hit home, alt enter, and generate a field for it. I'll double click that private keyword and delete it. Now I've got a rigid body that I can modify in the update method. Every update frame from now until we've destroyed our object, we're gonna just set the velocity to be vector2.right. So I'll say rb.velocity equals vector2.right. The last thing I wanna do is make this thing just disable itself or destroy itself when it hits an object. So we'll add an on collision enter 2D. And here I'll just say game object.setActive false. Get rid of that private keyword again. And now I've got a very simple blaster shot that should just fire off to the right until it touches another object and then turn itself off. Let's go see if it works. So I'll go back into Unity. And we should be able to press play now and then watch our blaster shots fire off. Let's go to game view, press the play button, and see if we can actually shoot things. The shots aren't going to kill anything or do any damage or anything like that, but they should just fire off like that. They fire off to the right and they just keep going and going and going and going and going. Eventually, there you see that they got hit by the laser and turned off. It's kind of cool. So the laser is turning them off, or hitting that other object just turned them off. If I jump up here and shoot things, so that eventually they just turn off as soon as they bump into something. All right, that's pretty cool, but my blaster shot moves way too slow. So next step is to speed it up. We're gonna open up the blaster shot script. And we're gonna add a serialized field at the top. So serialized field, where's that at? Oh, it was already right on it. And we'll call this, well, first we got to give it a type, which is going to be a float because we're going to want a decimal. And we'll call this underscore speed, and I'll give it a default of, well, we'll start with a 1. Now we'll copy that speed and multiply that times our vector2.right. So it'll move at whatever speed we've given it. Now I know 1 is actually too slow because that's what it's doing already. So I'm going to crank it up to a default of something like 3, or let's even go with 5. That seems like a better speed. I want my shots to go faster than I'm running. And that'll give me lots of speed or lots of room to run up to 5 meters a second. Or maybe 4.5 so that I'm not catching up to my own bullets. Let's press play and see what that feels like. And then remember that we can go modify it on our blaster shot prefab. So I can fire my shots, and if that feels good, then cool. If I feel like that's a little bit too slow though, and go find my player blaster shot right here, modify this prefab and maybe turn this up to an 8. And those shots look nice and quick. Might be a little too fast, maybe like a 7. And yeah, I think maybe let's try running. So I'm gonna run towards my shots. Yeah, I'm thinking maybe a 7 or an 8. Let's try running towards the shots with an 8. Yeah, I'm going to go with a value of 8. So I'm going to leave an 8 on my blaster shots. I'm going to open up the script real quick, change the default to be the value that I think I'm going to use. So that way, if my prefab gets reset or anything, I don't have to remember this in 2 places, and I don't have 2 numbers stored off trying to remember which one I want to actually use. So I'll make that match, but still leave it adjustable in the inspector. And now the last thing I want to add to this is a way to set the direction so that it can go either left or right instead of always going to the right. And I'm going to do that with a new method. We're going to add a launch method. We'll make a public void launch that'll take in a direction. So we'll go vector2 direction, and this will get stored off into a direction variable. I'll say underscore direction equals direction. We'll add a field for that. And then in our update, instead of going to the right, we'll go to the direction. So we'll just copy direction and replace vector2.right. I'm going to probably give it a default value of vector2.right. So if we don't have something in there, it's just going to go off to the right. And then we'll get rid of that private keyword as well. So we need to call our launch method now. We'll do that from the blaster since the blaster's spawning this. So we're going to go find our blaster, and when we instantiate our shot, we'll get a reference to our blaster shot and then call launch and tell it to go in our current direction. So say var shot equals that instantiate, which is going to return back right now a game object because the type that we have here is game object. If I put blaster shot here, it's going to say, hey, this is an error because instantiate returns back a game object and it can't just implicitly convert it to that type. Now, the way that we can fix this, there are 2 options. We could do get component on it and try to get the blaster shot. But if we just make the type that gets serialized here blaster shot instead, then we can actually get back that specific component. Now that we have that component, we'll just say shot.launch, and we want to launch in our current direction. And we don't have a way to get our current direction yet. What we want to do now is get that from our player. So I'll say underscore player dot direction. Had to hit backspace there to get rid of that input that it tried to auto add. We don't have a player stored off and there's no direction on the player. So let's cache our player in awake and then go add the direction variable to it. So I'll copy player, and right here above the player input part, we'll say underscore player equals get component, and we're going to get a player, not a player input, but a player. We'll hit Alt Enter, generate a field, and we should get that right by our player input. I'm going to double click player, hit enter, so I get a new line and get rid of all that at the same time. The final thing we need to do is have our player know which direction it's facing. And we could just grab the rotation, the quaternion rotation from this player and then convert it. But I want to show you an easy way that I think works a little bit better for controlling our inputs. We're going to hit Alt Enter and we're going to generate a property on our for direction. We'll hit F12 to go to it. And here you see that we've got a vector2 with a public getter and an internal set. We're going to change the set to be private. So this is going to be a variable that says which way we're going, left or right, and can only be set by the player, but can be read by everything else. That's why it's public with a getter and private with the set. So the set is kind of overriding the public part over here to the left. Now, when we flip direction of our character, which is right down here in update sprite and animation, we could actually flip this variable as well. Be nice and easy, so then it just lines up with our actual inputs so that we can fire off in the direction that we're pressing, not necessarily the direction that we want to move. So I'm going to add some braces around our horizontal part, and we'll say direction equals vector2 dot right if horizontal is greater than 0, and then if horizontal is less than 0, we'll switch direction equal to vector2 dot left. We'll save that off, and right now this is a little bit confusing because the name of this method no longer matches what it does. So I'm going to take this little bit of code, the part that updates our direction, select it so it's 155 through 164, hit Alt Enter, and we're going to extract a method. And I'm going to call this update direction. Now I'm going to take this code out of update sprite and animation. So I'll select line 155 and cut it. Then we're going to find the reference to update sprite and animation. So I'll click this line right here, and it'll show us the references, or I can hit Shift F12 or right click on it and hit find all references. Lots of different ways to pop them up. Once I find the one place where it's called, which looks like it's on line 111 in the player script, literally it already went to it because I double clicked it. That's what happened. So now that I found that line, I'm just going to add in update direction as well. So I'll paste that right below. So update sprite and animation, then update direction. And update sprite and animation is actually just updating the animation. So now I'm going to rename it to be update animation. Delete out these extra 2 lines here, 155 and 156 that were there. And now I've got slightly cleaner code that does exactly what it's supposed to do and says what it does. It's named right. Let's get rid of that private keyword there. Save, do a build, Control-Shift-B, get rid of all the errors. And it looks like something added a weird using statement here. Line 6 Blaster got a using static experimental graph view line. I don't know what added that, but I'll hit Shift, delete, and delete it. We can delete all of these other unused using statements as well. Save. Go back into Unity, and now we should be able to launch in the direction that we've chosen. It's not going to flip our blaster shot around, but it should at least move in the correct direction. Let's go test it out. So we'll press play. So we move to the right and shoot, it goes to the right, and if I move to the left and shoot, my shots go to the left. I think if I stop playing and play again, if I don't move at all, I've never set my direction on my player, so it's probably going to shoot, not in any direction at all. So we need to give ourselves an initial direction on that player value. Let's just go open up that player script, find the direction, go select it, control click, and then right at the end of the property declaration, we can do an equals vector2.right. That's our default direction for this game. So with that done, I'm going to go back into Unity and we're going to commit our changes for our blaster shot that now fires in the proper direction, although it doesn't quite look that way yet. It doesn't rotate the right way, but it moves in the correct direction. So blaster shot script added to the prefab, and it now fires in the correct direction. Oh, no S at the end or backspace, and check in.